Welcome to the lesson R.3 on the present tense in Spanish. In Spanish, there are three types of verbs, no more than three. These are the verbs that end in AR, ER, and IR. When the verb is in the AR, ER, or IR form, that is called the infinitive form. We can also conjugate these verbs, and what that means is we no longer end in AR, ER, or IR. We replace the AR, ER, or IR with an ending that correlates to the subject being attached to its meaning. There are also three different types of moods for verbs. The mood that you know currently is the indicative. This is for simple sentences. We'll also eventually learn the subjunctive mood, used for complex sentences, and the imperative mood, or a way of giving commands. Within each of these moods there's multiple tenses, so we'll stick with the indicative for a while and learn many different tenses within the indicative. And for right now, the first tense is reviewing the present tense of regular verbs. For AR verbs, when we attach a subject like yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes, ellos, or ellas, the endings we will attach are o, as, a, amos, ais, an. Notice the accent mark in the vosotros. For ER and IR verbs, the endings are nearly the same. The only difference is encountered in the nosotros and the vosotros. O, es, e is identical for both an ER and an IR verb. But now they are different. Hemos, eis for an ER verb, hemos, is for an IR verb, and then finally en for the ustedes, ellos, and ellas form. Now remember, we take off the infinitive, we take off the AR, the ER, and the IR, and then we add these endings to them. Now, a special rule to note is that in every sentence there is only one verb allowed to be conjugated. The only exception to this rule is if we have a conjunction, like the word and, or but, or because. When we have conjunctions, it splits the sentence and then we can have more than one conjugated verb. But if conjunctions are not present, the first verb will be conjugated and any additional verbs must remain in the infinitive or the gerund form. Now, of course, Spanish is a little difficult with its verbs because there are plenty of irregulars. In the present tense, we have two types of irregulars that are only irregular in the yo form, and these are known as the yogo verbs and the yo irregulars. All other conjugations, the to form, the nosotros, the vosotros, the ellos, the él, ella, all of those forms are totally normal for these verbs unless otherwise noted. These are only irregular in the yo form, so we only have the yo forms listed here. For the yogo verbs, these verbs all end in go in the yo form. Poner becomes pongo, salir, salgo, hacer, hago. Totally normal in all other conjugations, they lose their ER or IR and go back to the normal chart. Tener and venir follow the same pattern, and they have an asterisk because they are also stem-changing verbs. Their E will become an IE in other conjugations, but in the yo form, they become tengo and vengo. Seguir and decir also follow a similar pattern in that they are stem changers. The E in seguir and decir will become an I in all conjugations but nosotros, vosotros. And the yo forms are sigo and digo. Now caer and traer both end in AER and they also follow a similar pattern and that they end in IGO. Caer becomes caigo, traer, traigo. But they're totally normal in every other conjugation. And lastly, we have oír. Oír becomes oigo in the yo form, but it does something special in all other conjugations where it has a Y. We'll see this verb again in just a little bit. Let's look at those verbs that don't follow the yo-go pattern, but are still only irregular in the yo form. Dar, estar, ver, saber, and conocer all have an irregular yo form, but are totally normal in other conjugations. Doy, estoy, veo, sé, conozco. Now, conocer is known to be an irregular yo form, but what few people realize is that any verb that ends in CER has the same pattern as conocer. Because if we drop the ER and we were just to add an O, it would become conozco. And to maintain the sound, Spanish adds the Z to soften the C. Conozco, ofrezco, reconozco. So any verb ending in CER in the present tense will end in ZCO in the yo form. Another thing that few people realize, which is also necessary because of the sound, is her and hir verbs, GER, GIR. To maintain the soft H-like sound, her, hir, we cannot merely drop the ER, IR and put O. It would turn to go. So Spanish switches the G to a J, and so the yo form will end in ho. Alright, there are some verbs that don't follow any patterns, and these are verbs like ser, ir, oír, or any verb that ends in UIR. Ser and ir you have to memorize. Soy, eres, es, somos, sois, son. No accent marks. Voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. No accent marks. A lot of people get the verb ir and the verb ver confused because they both start with a V in their conjugations. Remember that it's voy, vas, va. A-S, A, A-M-O-S. That's the verb ir. Ver is an ER verb and it would be E-S-E. So that's how you can distinguish between the two. As I mentioned before, oír is a yo-go verb, but in the other conjugations it has a Y. Oyes, oye, oyen. In the nosotros and vosotros we have letter combinations that are allowed, but we need to accent them, so we can get oímos, oís, without a Y needed. A similar thing happens to any verb that ends in UIR. For certain vowel combinations, we have to plug in a Y, and this is what's happening. Yo, yes, ye. But nosotros, vosotros is fine to just go to an I, imos, is, but back to yin. Sometimes people will put the verb estar on an irregular list. It can be considered an irregular because of the accented A in its conjugations, but it's still following the normal pattern after the yo form, so I don't include it on an irregular slide. Another important thing with the present tense to remember are the stem changing verbs. You might also remember these as boot verbs. What happens with stem changing verbs is that they require a vowel change within the main part of the verb. There are 4 types of possible vowel changes. E can become IE or just I, and you have to memorize what type of change each verb has, if it even has a change. O becomes UE, and U becomes UE. Now these vowel changes will happen in all conjugations except for nosotros, vosotros, which is what gives them their boot-like appearance. They follow the normal AR, ER, and IR endings. They just undergo the vowel change in the yo to usted, el, ella, ustedes, ellos, and ellas form. So look at the verb cerrar, which means to close. It is a stem-changing verb, and by memory, we should know it changes E to IE. Cierro, cierras, cierra, cerramos, cerráis, cierran. Notice that the vowel changed in all conjugations but nosotros, vosotros. Also notice that this is an AR verb, so the endings were o, as, a, amos, ais, an. pedir is on our list for E to I. So we'll change the vowel to an I in all conjugations but nosotros, vosotros. Pido, pides, pide, pedimos, pedís, piden. Notice that an IR verb maintains its IR endings. O, es, e, imos, is, en. Let's look at an O to UE verb, volver. Volver turns to vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, and vuelven. But in nosotros, vosotros, the O does not change. Volvemos, volvéis. The nice thing is with it being an ER verb, it uses the ER endings. O, es, e, hemos, eis, en. And then finally, there are only two verbs in Spanish that undergo a U to UE, and jugar is the only one you're going to encounter. Jugar becomes juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, jugáis, juegan. An AR verb with AR normal endings of o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. Now it's time to show me what you know. See you in class.